Hi, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Dynamics 365 Security and Licensing Enforcement. I'm Sebastian Anderson with the Licensing and Database Desk here at Avantiico. Staying on top of the latest requirements, compliance deadlines, and reporting hurdles is critical to keeping your D365 licensing in check. As Microsoft's enforcement has been live for some time now, database size and its relationship to licensing is also becoming a concern for organizations both large and small. To help you navigate the interplay of all these details, we're joined by Morten Løgstrup, our Director of Customer Engagement, and Tatiana Subotin, our Licensing and Database Technical Lead. They'll be walking us through what Microsoft's rolling enforcement means for FNSCM users, how licensing directly impacts your database storage entitlements and costs, how to use Azure Telemetry Insights to correct license assignments, what's new in user security and governance, how to audit your current license usage and roles, real-world examples of our licensing approach in action, and a limited time licensing assessment offer for attendees, as well as a live Q&A. Morten will be taking over shortly, but before we get started with today's session, I'd love to share some of the other exciting webinars and events we have in the pipeline. First up, on July 28th, tune in to Azure Synapse versus Microsoft Fabric, an expert-led webinar. Join Microsoft Fabric expert and Azure data engineer Sunny Ihuoma to learn what most teams get wrong when moving from Synapse to Fabric. Understand the real architecture, performance, and cost differences between the two platforms, and get practical guidance on migrating your pipelines without breaking reporting or blowing your budget. We will have other events and webinars added to the calendar, so be sure to keep an eye on this space. We've got some exciting things coming up in 2026, including more on our ISV solutions like 3PL, AMCS, and others. On top of that, please let us know if there are any topics you would like to see us cover in the future. All registration links for these events will be available in the chat, on our website, and within this slide deck. One last note, as we go through this presentation, do not hesitate to pop any questions you have into the chat. There will be a few interludes for questions during the show, as well as an open Q&A at the very end. Any questions that aren't answered live will be addressed in direct email follow-up. And with that, Morten, take it away.
Thank you, Sebastian, and welcome everybody. Good morning, evening, afternoon, wherever you are. I'll probably spend 15-20 minutes today to walk over some of the things that we know and some of the things that we don't know. And compared to last time, I will do some demonstration of the PPAC reports and also dig into some database reduction. And why am I saying this? Microsoft's fiscal year started 6 days ago, July 1st, and it's been told, or at least communicated kind of to partners, that Microsoft are increasing their focus on usage. And usage, that comes back to assigning licenses and so on to users. So it's going to be an interesting next 12 months from what are Microsoft actually doing and what are we seeing in the partner channel, and then what are you experiencing as a customer. Really quick, some deadlines. Nothing have changed the last many months when it comes to deadlines. It's still the case-by-case scenario. I have a slide a little bit later. You can take a screenshot of it if you haven't seen it. Otherwise, you should be very familiar with it. It's still the same Dynamics applications that are being enforced. What is still unknown is when they're actually going to enforce storage, device licenses, sandboxes, and so on. We do know that storage is definitely going higher up on the priority list, because Microsoft have come out with a number of new both webinars and tool sets and so on. So storage is definitely something you should start paying attention to if you haven't done it already. The device licenses, yes, they are not enforced, but you are obligated to have the right licenses if you have scanners and so on in your warehouses. Um, what else do we know? Since we spoke last time, many customers are reporting the warning banners for users that do not have a license. We also have a few customers that have told us enforcement has started in the sense that users cannot log in to the system if they don't have a license. We do also know that there's still bugs or issues with enforcing the commerce license. So please check your D365 PPAC, or sorry, your PPAC report in Power Platform Admin Center, because that could show some misleading data. It's only in very few cases we actually see that the commerce license are triggered, but make sure that it's correct in your case, and we can look into that in a little bit. I'll show you that in a demo. And then, as mentioned, focus is shifting a little bit, I feel, to the database reduction in finance and supply chain. Since we spoke last time, actually in the July licensing guide, there's no changes, so that's good. This is the changes from June, or the change log that was in the guide. Nothing have changed to that, so I'll skip over. This is the validation timeline. If you haven't, take a screenshot of it and then compare it to your own renewal dates, because then you should get a really good indication of when users will receive a notification banner, and when you need to have all the right licenses assigned to users. And assigned, that's the keyword for now. One thing that we have seen, and it's probably still a system issue from a Microsoft side. If a user, for example, require a base license and an attached license, we have seen that they are struggling enforcing the attached license. With that said, you still need it if your security model tells you so. But we have seen some issues in the attached license being enforced as of now. It might be fixed as we speak, but that's what we're seeing, what we're hearing. Banners, we looked at this last time. This is from different production environments, users logging in with no licenses. They get this, contact your admin and assign licenses immediately. That is pretty much the common banner, and that has not changed since we spoke last time. The enforcement, users cannot log in. You will see a screen similar to this. If you have tried to go into PPAC report and don't have the right permission, the screen looks kind of similar. But it's started, it's happening, and it's not going away. Any questions, Sebastian, before we jump into a little bit of product demonstration?
Nothing in the chat so far, but ladies and gentlemen, please feel free to add anything you'd like, and we will address it later on.
That's good. That's good. Let me share my screen here. A second. Let me share my screen. Oh. Let me know when you see it.
It's looking good on my end.
Zoom in a
Time
little
for
bit.
a little database analysis.
Is that better?
Yes.
Good. So everybody should be very familiar with the Power Platform Admin Center. Since Microsoft introduced the entire Power Platform, they slowly moved more and more of the functionalities and the measurements and the reports into the Power Platform Admin Center. And it's going to be the tool going forward that you're going to use when it comes to licensing, when it comes to consumption, and so on and so forth. This is an example of the finance and operation report. You can see there's different tiles up here with users require license, unlicensed, under license, over license, and so on. And there's a great detail when you dig into, okay, unlicensed user, who is it? What is it that they need? Okay, he need a project operation. Where can you assign it? And say, why does he need a project operation? You can drill one step further, and you can then see, okay, it's actually the security role project manager that drives the project operation license. And you can then drill a step further And then it's here where it becomes very technical, and you need someone like Tatiana to help trim the entitlement in case the user is actually not using the role that is triggering the license. And that is a very common use case where we see users needing a bunch of licenses, but when we run the telemetry data, it actually shows that many of the functionalities of the security roles they have assigned, they have never activated them, meaning you can trim those entitlements down, and then they don't have the let's say 2 or 3 attached license requirements. And that is really good when it comes to both saving money on licenses, but also from a security standpoint and a compliance standpoint if you have to report on those things. But back to the workspace, you get a lot of details in here around what kind of license do your users need, how many do you have available, and so on and so forth. And as most know, you assign them in your admin center, standard admin center, where you also assign office licenses and so on and so forth. Um, Database capacity. And the reason why we are spending a little bit of time on that is because a few weeks ago, Microsoft came out with some additional information around what they are doing in order to help customers reduce the database capacity, because they realized, I think they have realized that for quite some time, that there's not a lot of tool sets available to trim down the databases. But let's go back to the summaries. In here, you get a high-level view of your different storage components. And when you go over to your finance and operations, you should see way less than you see here. You probably have a handful of sandboxes, maybe a little bit less, and then one, in some cases, 2 production environments. But when you take time and go into some of this, definitely open your different tabs here on production, because you can actually see what's driving the capacity. And depending on your who you're working with and how you are operating, there are some of these tables that can be reduced depending on how your D365 setup is configured. And just one example, let me actually bring this up. A batch job history. I know from other customers that batch job history can be set as archiving after 90 days, 60 days, 30 days. And that is, for example, one thing that could jack up the consumption. We also know that a lot of what takes up space is actually Microsoft indexes that are very, very hard to do anything about. But I will post as soon as I'm done here and handing it over to Tatiana. I'll post a little link to a Microsoft webinar I would recommend you watch in case you have a lot of or a larger database that you predict. What else? Any questions, Sebastian?
No questions so far.
That's good.
I would
That's good.
also like to add that Microsoft has been slowly updating the UI for license management, like Morten is showing here, and it is likely that they will add newer stuff in the future in terms of how to look at your database. So just be sure to check in regularly and see if there's anything new in the UI that you might not have, or that you might have missed even a couple of weeks ago.
I can actually also show something here. If you find my screen here, screen share. Whoop. If you go down to, we can also take here, if you click on the different usage, storage by environment and so on, you actually get some additional granular detail. And as you can see here, for example, the database is 442, and we have 1.8 terabyte available. We have a lot of licenses as a partner, so of course we also get even more storage. But with each license come additional storage. There is some licenses where you don't get storage, and I have a slide about that in a little bit. But definitely pay attention to this, because it's going to be enforced sometimes next year. Is the communication from Microsoft. Who knows if they are starting that enforcement earlier. And the reason why we should pay a lot of attention to it with the current prices. I'll show you in a second. That is. Whoop. Let me jump over here. Do you see my screen, Sebastian?
Yes.
Good. The reason for this is actually from the licensing guide. You can see how much storage you get per license, and we are talking about two types of storage. We are talking about Dataverse storage, and then we are talking about operation storage or finance and supply chain storage. And they are kind of two separate databases. When it comes to pricing, and the reason why this is going to be really important is because it's really expensive, and Microsoft have not changed the prices since the launched the SKUs in the pricing catalog, which to me is probably an indication of we are keeping these prices, and then we want customers to either reduce the databases, or we want them to pay for the storage. And as you can see right here, we had like a 1.8 terabyte or something like that. If you were to pay for that, let's say that's give and take $800,000. So that's a lot of money. And we do see some customers that have a lot of legal entities, a lot of intercompany, or something not configured the way it's supposed to be, that is jacking up the database. So if you have any issues in your PPAC report, you have any concerns, please reach out, and we are more than happy to take a look and see if we can help or guide you in some directions on how you can get that under control, so that you are a little bit ahead of the curve. Yeah. Any questions, Sebastian?
We do have one from Marco. Where can I view device licenses, or are they similar to operations licenses? Essentially, where is a good place to get an overview of all the licenses you've got running?
That good question, Marco. In this view, it is a little bit different from the one I showed, but in this view, you can see all the self-service, the team member activity, and so on and so forth. Operations activity, as you mentioned. Device license are not here yet, but in your when you extract your users, Tatiana can probably remember it better than me, but for a device, it has a specific name. So you would actually extract the users in the system, and then in most cases, they have a unique user ID, device 1, device 2, for example, and you can see what devices you have in there. And Braden is also on the call. I can't remember if the device licenses are populating in the telemetry data. I bet we can answer that in a few seconds. But right now, there's no enforcement on device. That's important to say. And I think it will probably be another tile in here as soon as they figure out how to enforce it. Right now, there's no way to see it other than looking into how many users you have in your system and what account does that device actually have.
Mm-hmm.
Good question.
And that's all we have so far. Once again, please feel free to ask any additional questions you might have.
Absolutely. The advanced analysis, if you're struggling with it, we do offer some in-depth analyses that give you why is your licensing the way they are, back to the numbers we saw before. What's actually driving the licenses? So the security roles, is it ISV? Is it some of the specific custom security roles, and so on and so forth? And then we provide also the how do you clean it up? And the cleanup process, from experience, that can be very cumbersome depending on the amount of users you have, the complexity, and also how fast you can test the new proposed security design. And we have seen it be kind of a back and forth from us and the customers, the end users that are testing, because it's a lengthy process So if you already experienced the warning banners and you need to test new security roles to avoid purchasing additional licenses, get it on the roadmap as fast as possible, because there's not really any guarantee how fast it can be implemented and tested and so on. Of course, again, depending on your organization's agility. If there's no more questions, I want to hand it over to Tatiana and give her approximately 35-40 minutes.
Going once, going twice. Sold to our resident licensing and database expert, Tatiana. Please feel free to take the floor as soon as you're ready. Now, just because we are hopping on to part 2 of the show does not mean that you can't still write in your questions. We will answer them at the end, or if we really run out of time, we will answer you in email follow-up. We'll use the power of modern technology.
Thank you, Sebastian. Thank you, Morten. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to our webinar. Today, I'm going to show you another working session. We are working with the clients and collecting their unique cases. We are doing a lot, and we are helping the clients to optimize their security configuration, their license consumption. And I want to share our experience today. And I will start with something what I already mentioned in the previous webinar, just because it happens to be the most popular topic. Let me go through this topic and let me share everything. Like everything what you're going to see today is going to be shareable. You can request the files. You can request all Excel spreadsheets. Everything what you see, we will be happy to share it with you. So the most popular topic this month was and is what drives the license. We somehow figured out how to identify active and inactive users and how to reduce our license requirements by deactivating inactive, relatively inactive users. But what drives the license is still the most important question. So I'll share my screen and I will show you again, and I will show you what's the next step after you identify what drives the license, what you can do with this. And also like what else, right? What else contributes into your license consumption? Something what we've never shared before. Okay, the show must go on.
Yes, exciting.
Yeah, me too. So this is our Contoso data, Contoso finance and operations, and we have, as you know, of course you know, because we've been dealing with this since March 1st, 2025, right? So it's been like a year and how many months? 4 months, right? 16 months. 16 months we're dealing with we've been dealing with the licenses. We're trying to figure out how to survive in this new requirement, and Microsoft helps us a lot. Microsoft developed the set of tools, you know about this, of course, and this set of tools is informative. So it helps you analyze and make a decision. So to find out what drives the license, first of all, you need to prepare your license, I should say security configuration snapshot. This is a perfect place to do it. You can stay in the DAT company or you can move to any other company. Everything what I'm going to talk about today is company irrelevant. So no matter where you're staying, you can export this data, you can run these queries, and it's going to be the same for all companies. The first one, as I mentioned already, is a security analysis. Security analysis is a spreadsheet, and for those who remember view permission screen that was available and still available in the role configuration, it's the same view permission screen, but for all roles altogether. We have to prepare our like when we're asking like okay, what drives the license, right? What drives the license? We need to identify the most challenging role, and we are doing today we're doing our analysis on the role level. So this is the most challenging role. I'm trying to pull the role right now. And yeah, I know it's a huge report. It takes some time to run this report. And how I know that while it's running, how do I know that this is a challenging role for me? I need to reduce the number of licenses that users consume, the users who are assigned to this role, and I don't know what to do, right? And I'm trying to figure out, like, okay, so why is it the most challenging? It's the most challenging because before starting any analysis, I looked at my license usage summary, and I found that the role, or I should say, I look through the user perspective, the users.
With the built-in dramatic pause of the loading screen.
Right. The users who are assigned to this role, these users require 3 licenses. 3 licenses is a lot. With the regular price, we would have to pay $270 a month, right? Having like an annual agreement with Microsoft and so on and so forth. So conditions applied, $270 a month, a lot, right? And looking at this, I don't know. Like I'm making a management decision, and it's an interesting part of our license remediation in the past projects. It turns out to be equally important to make a management decision on time, like a managerial decision on time, along with the analyzing telemetry. We always keep saying, like, analyze telemetry, you will see what users need. But in fact, sometimes we need to make a decision to drop the license on a certain role. And we need to make it like, let's say I want to drop a human resource and keep finance and supply chain. We don't have an out-of-box tool to do this. Why? The out-of-box tool allows you to keep just 1 license per role, because this is how the standard approach works, right? Microsoft proposes the gold standard is 1 role, 1 license. But what if you badly need more than 1 role or more than 1 license per role? So let me show you the standard approach again. And I will just remind you, of course, I believe you know this. You go to the security configuration and you can cut licenses from the role, right? You cut permissions, you cut licenses. You find the role, and you can duplicate this role into a different one. No, you give another name to this role, and you determine what license this role should be. But you can determine only 1 license. What if you need to keep 2 licenses? This approach is not going to work for 2 licenses. 1 license per role. So this is a great approach. What this script does is it duplicates the role and it revokes duties and privileges that cause other licenses, like supply chain and human resource. However, the most, as I mentioned, the most often question is how to keep two licenses. For example, I want to drop the third license. I want to keep two licenses. How to find those menu items that drive the two, the three, the four licenses. And in this case, we are looking at all three lines, right? All three records in the license usage summary report, where one user shows us three license consumption. We identify the role and we go to the role license. Role license section. Now we know there are three roles. How to identify what menu items drive those licenses. First, we know it is a supply chain management. So the supply chain management license, it has 24 entitled and 3 not entitled menu items. It means that if we didn't have these 3 menu items, we would be able to consume supply chain license. But because of these 3 menu items, it is not a pure supply chain. And we look at the bottom part, we filter in the entitled column by yes. So we identify which menu items drive entitlement to the supply chain role, and we export it. Any kind of export will work. Export all roles. You right click on export all roles will work. You will get the spreadsheet. The spreadsheet is going to be, I have exported this. I want to save our time. The spreadsheet is going to be like this. And here we have a key to run VLOOKUP later and to find what's entitled, what's not. So this is a supply chain export. As we know, 24 menu items drive entitlement for supply chain. The key is just a concatenation of multiple fields. Then we need to do the same for finance license. Again, we filter by entitled. Should be more precise. And we export it. And we get 19 lines, exact 19 lines here, and the same structure, the same data structure, and the key. And then we do it the third time. We export human resource. 7 entitlements. Again, we filter by entitled. There are 7 entitlements, and we place it into the human resource part of the spreadsheet, human resource tab. Now we need to export a security analysis report. I hope my security analysis report responded. Yes, okay, it did. And I export all lines from this report. All lines are counted, because the lines show us the duties, the privileges, and the menu items and their access. So we exported them, we placed them into this tab. As you see, I removed the last 2 columns. We don't need the help column and the label column are not needed here. I just need permissions level, and I need roles, sub-roles, duties, privileges, and resource and context. And then I need to identify the access level. If you look at the entitlement, the access level is defined in the column D. It's write versus read. Write versus read is very straightforward identification. So if read is the only granted permission, then it's a read access. If there are other permissions granted, it's a write access. It's a binary yes/no, like read granted, other are not granted. It's a read granted, the other ones are granted. It's write. Read can be not granted, the other ones are granted. It's also write. So any of this is write, and only this is read. We identify the access level because our entitlement is driven by the access level. It's not just the menu item. It's not the type of the menu item. It's also the access level. And we create the same type of the key. So I combine secureable type, LET name, and access level. So I combine what kind of menu item it is. In this case, it's an item. It's a display menu item. The name of the menu item, and the access level, which is write in our scenario. And same here, I identify the access level, I need to calculate it, and then I create the same key. And the last step is to run a VLOOKUP and find whether this combination is entitled for a certain license, or it's not entitled. 0 means not entitled, 1 means entitled. I highlighted with yellow the lines that run unique requirement, license requirement, and like a very simple yes/no flag, which is unique requirement versus common requirement. So we see that in our example, we have quite a lot of unique requirements. We have one unique requirement for finance. So technically, the easiest way to cut the license on this role is to revoke one little menu item, or reconsider the privilege, right? If we're working on the privilege level, if we say the privilege is almost perfect, let's work with the privileges, and we want to revoke a privilege to cut the license. What privilege do you need to revoke? Now, definitely the privilege that contains this unique entitlement, this unique license requirement. The privilege is called maintain costing parameters. And if I revoke this privilege from this role, this unique requirement will go away, and we will get only supply chain and human resource requirement. But if we look a little bit deeper, we have only 2 menu items that require a human resource. So mostly the whole role is built as a supply chain role. Because as you see, only a few lines have zeros in the supply chain, means that a few lines don't qualify for the supply chain license, are not entitled to the supply chain license. If you remember, it showed us 3 not entitled. 3 not entitled menu items, and we already identified those 3 not entitled menu items. So the next step, if I want to cut the human resource license, will be to revoke a privilege that drives that human resource license. It's the privilege called cost type, and the privilege called maintain cost price hours. So 2 privileges, they require a human resource, unique human resource entitlement. If I revoke these 2 privileges, then I'm going to have a pure supply chain license, and I will save $60 per role on all users who are assigned to this license, to this role. So telemetry can skip it. Sometimes we have cases when telemetry shows, because telemetry, as you know, telemetry, it doesn't show what exactly the user did while the user accessed a certain menu item. The user was probably browsing around, or the user was updating something. Telemetry doesn't capture this information. Telemetry only shows that the menu item has been accessed, and it's a timestamp when it was accessed and who accessed, right? Let me remind you what telemetry is. So if we go to our portal azure.com, we can configure telemetry as application insights resource. We can configure finance and supply chain environment connection to telemetry, and we will be able to run simple queries to query this data. You can switch to the KQL mode and run very simple queries like this, for example. And it will show you the spreadsheet with the timestamp, what menu item was accessed, has been accessed, who was the user who accessed the menu item, and how long it took to open this, to access this menu item. So it doesn't show what exactly I did. So it doesn't show what kind of access I require, write versus read, right? We just talked about this access level. So telemetry doesn't show access level. And in this case, when we run security analysis report with the telemetry incorporated, sometimes we have the situation when the telemetry shows us the false requirement. Why? Because the user has full access, but the user actually hasn't updated anything. The user was browsing around, and the read access would be enough. The user doesn't need write access, but telemetry shows that the user engaged their permissions in the security role, and it looks like the permission is required. And if telemetry allows you to save, to make 50% of the savings, another 50% of the savings is coming from the analyzing patterns and like from the common sense. That was a great example we ran with a client when we saved about 30% of 30% of the total license requirement, applying telemetry, analyzing everything, reconfiguring security, and then we saved 20% more making decisions that no, these users actually don't need write access. These users don't need the license. These users, like in this case, these users don't need finance license. These users don't need HR license. Supply chain license is all they need. And sometimes it's an activity license, because our goal is always to downgrade from a full license, like full base license, like supply chain, finance, commerce, project operations, human resource, to activity license whenever it's possible. And when we apply these decisions, like let's remove the license, when we like an actual case, when we applied, when we revoked all permissions that drove lots of licenses. In that case, it was 2 extra licenses that the users didn't need. It was project operations and finance licenses. So we kept only supply chain license. When we applied this decision, only 1 user suffered. Among 100, only 1 user got back and said, I cannot do my job because I'm missing permissions. I need more permissions. So sometimes we need to make a decision like this. We need to analyze a little bit deeper, and we need to make a decision. Yeah, you know what? You guys actually don't need this privilege. You don't need this duty, and we can save on the licenses. Questions, please. Do you guys have questions about what drives the license requirement when we are looking at the security?
Morton is speaking to one of our viewers right now in the chat, but this might be a good topic for us to generally cover. So, if someone needs a particular role to, let's say, for example, create a customer, how might someone who needs a certain role that usually requires a higher license optimize that role or that assignment to make the cost lower? Would they maybe try to assign the expensive licenses to as few people as possible? Would you try to approach this in a more distributed fashion? How do you generally go about separating expensive roles from non-expensive roles as a matter of strategy?
This is a great question. So usually we first of all we go with telemetry. I'll be honest, I don't we don't try to develop something what is obvious. We go with the telemetry, and based on telemetry we just identify. So just like if the user has this role, right? Like the role is assigned. If the user has this role and the user shows access in the telemetry to this menu item, we understand that most likely the user, like potentially the user needs this menu item, and then potentially the user will require a supply chain management license. We apply exactly this approach, merged by users, like users, their role assignment, and this breakdown, right? So I'm looking at exactly what license is required by the menu item and collecting this information among all menu items that user accessed. We're determining what role, what license is required. So I'm not going with the role. So like in this case, the role requires 3 licenses. The user is assigned to this role. By default, the user requires 3 licenses. But if in telemetry the user shows me that the user never accessed these 2 menu items, one is finance, another one is human resource. The user never has accessed this menu item. The user never has accessed these privileges, this privileges, this privilege, this privilege, this privileges. So on the privilege level, if the user has never accessed these privileges, I can assume that most likely this license is not required. It is not required. And if I don't see any activity on these privileges, the first assumption we go with is the user requires a supply chain management license. And everything what we are going to recalculate is going to be based on this requirement. The user requires a supply chain management license. The user never showed us any activity in the finance privileges, pure finance, right? Not the ones that have both. This has both finance and supply chain entitlement. So it can play a role of finance and supply chain. But if the user never showed us any activity on the pure finance, on the pure human resource, I question, okay, so most likely the user doesn't have supply chain. It's an assumption. We deal with the assumption. And then we, among all roles, right? We're looking among all the user roles and all user activities, telemetry versus security analysis report. All roles, all activities. And then we identify the license that is really required. And we suggest to drop everything else for this user. How do we drop? In this case, the easiest way to drop it would be to split this role into a few peer license, the way how Microsoft suggests, one role, one license. And then the user who doesn't show activity in finance and human resource, this user is not going to be granted the roles related to finance and human resource, only supply chain. And we cut users' consumption, license consumption, by looking at the real requirement via telemetry. Let's say we did it, right? But we still see that lots of users require human resource. Where is it coming from? Like, it's a very common question. Like, where is it coming from? Still, human resource, project operations. People say, like, we don't have human resource, we don't have commerce, we don't have project operations. Then we need to go deeper. We need to make a decision. The users are not going to have human resource. Let's see. The users are not going to have commerce. Let's see how it's going to work. So we cut the license more just because it's a common sense. We don't have these operations. We know exactly who is operating and requiring a commerce license and who is just like a telemetry false signal, like a victim of the telemetry false signal. We like usually we know when we see a commerce requirement for the warehouse worker, we know it's incorrect because unless it's part of the business, right? Every client knows their situation better than anybody else. I just highlighted, I just bring a question up, like why does the worker, warehouse worker, require a commerce license? Is it part of your business, or is it a false telemetry signal, or is it just an accident? What's that? So we always go through such questions after we cut half of the licenses already. We go through the things that don't make any sense. You know, like we're looking deeper and we're like, okay, so it doesn't make any sense. Oh, it does. Tell me more about it. If it does, we keep it. If it doesn't, let's apply another revocation. And the first step is telemetry, definitely. Then there is another interesting thing. I will spend tell me if I please let me know if I answered your question. If I haven't answered your question, we can schedule a very quick meeting and go through your situation, like your particular situation, and I'll be happy to help you. One more thing, one more interesting case. So when we are looking at our license usage summary by user, right? We see like we see what Microsoft proposes as a license requirement. So this report proposes finance, human resource, and supply chain management. So what's the base license? What's the attached license? If you like if you haven't been here, if you've never seen one of the tables that I refer to all the time, just explore it, please. The table is called, where is it? License by role. So it's the table that you can retrieve in the table browser. I'll share the file. I'll share the all the references. So this table shows you actually which license is proposed to be based, which license is supposed to be proposed to be attached. And that's Microsoft calculation based on the priorities. We already talked about priorities in our previous webinars. Microsoft has priorities when they calculate the licenses. Supply chain has the highest priority. The next one is finance, then commerce, then project operations, then human resource, right? In this case, and again, I have to repeat it because it's like something what we deal with all the time. Like these two items on their own, if we didn't have anything else, they would be supply chain items. Why? Because supply chain has higher priority. Yes, they are entitled for both licenses, supply chain and finance, but it is supply chain because supply chain has a higher priority than finance. If we take these menu items, they're also finance, or they're also supply chain. They're entitled to 3 licenses, but they are supply chain because they are the supply chain has the highest priority. So by priority. However, how to buy licenses, right? It's another interesting question that popped up recently, and we dealt with the situations when the users are finance users, like they are finance users, like accountant or somebody else, right? But I was told this, like the real, it's a reality. Microsoft doesn't allow us to buy 8 finance licenses. They force us to buy 20 finance licenses. There is a minimum required, right? It's a very interesting topic. There is a minimum. When you're buying licenses, there is a minimum applied to certain types of licenses. And it was an interesting exercise, again, with the client. So this is the current license requirement, the client current license requirement. These are the minimums. We know them from the licensing guide. This is required licenses based on the table that I just shared with you. So if you look at the required licenses, you see that, for example, finance is 28, supply chain is 97. Okay, commerce is 0, but we have like in this case we probably don't have probably not that like not the situation. It's just a real case with clients, a real case. But sometimes we see, let's say finance is 2 and we are forced to buy 20. What you can do, you can play with numbers and you can move supply chain to finance, attach from one type to another type, and find a perfect scenario where you're not forced to buy licenses just because this is a minimum, where you are buying the licenses because they're really required. So if I had 3 pure finance and 5 finance attached, I would be able to move if I had 3 pure finance and 20 attached, I would be able to move 20 to pure finance, and attachment, I would be able to move attachment from the supply chain to the supply chain attachment. So playing with numbers, you can reduce a lot of you can save money, and you can go even deeper. Sometimes the current subscription is quite redundant and you don't know what to do. So sometimes you need to reclassify. And in this example, I just showed the client, since it was a real example, I showed the client that they don't need to buy extra licenses. The extra would cost $6,400. They just need to spend $2,400 by reclassifying licenses from one type to another type. By playing with the numbers, like just playing with the minimums, you can reclassify the licenses so that your total required delta that increases your cost is going down. This is something what we started doing recently because it was like a very bright case, as you see, right? It's a very it's not a unique situation. Actually, it's a very a clear situation where we can save. So please feel free to ask questions. We'll be happy to follow up. We will be happy to share more. Do you have questions?
Well, we have had a rather lively chat here on the side, which is always good to see. In terms of what has been brought up, if anyone has any more questions that they feel were not answered in our side chat, please feel free to let us know. One thing I would add, real quick, is that everything Tatiana just talked about, as you could tell, is very dependent on enabling telemetry. There is a guide pasted in our chat as to how to enable telemetry. For those of you watching video on demand, please find this guide on our website or feel free to reach out to us directly. It's also important to note that enabling telemetry does not have any performance penalty on your system. All of this information is already being processed by Microsoft behind the scenes. When you turn it on for yourself, you're just getting access to what's already there, and the cost is minimal.
The cost is can be zero if your telemetry is not too extensive. So first 5 gigabyte are free every month on the monthly basis, and most likely you're not going to spend more than $10 to $20 a month. Worst case.
It's very, very much worth it to gain insight into this information.
With that said, I think also we are on time. If there's any additional questions, if you have some specific scenarios, reach out. We can jump on a call, get some more information into your specific use case, and see how we can help you if we can. Thank you all for attending, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Cheers, everyone. And remember, we're just one email away if you need us.